So one of the outcomes of providing this targeted in-consult decision support is that we often find that the information that we're presenting takes more time to consume than what's available in that individual consultation, particularly where the patient has presented with it for a different reason than what the education is tackling. Our recent awareness campaign for ATTR amyloidosis, a life-threatening heart condition, is a prime example of this. And in this instance, the educational content was triggered based on a set of criteria that was quite complicated, that looked way back in the patient historical record, and it looked for symptoms that would not often be appreciated as being red flags for this condition. And digesting this new information about this serious condition that only until recently was not treatable, for a patient who might be presenting with a cough or cold, might feel a bit rushed or impractical to consume with a patient sitting in front of the clinician at that point in time. And so for these reasons, along with the practical need for GPs to keep pace with all of the changing CPD requirements, 50 hours per annum, across 17 different accredited CPD homes, we've worked with our friends at Praxhub to bring you, our clinicians, with access to on-demand content from within the patient management software. And so where is this going? Well, have a think about if we were tracking all of the activities that you were doing in the software on a day-to-day basis that were actually accredited activities, whether that be reading the targeted decision support, whether it's recalling patients through our smart visual dashboard recall lists, or whether it's interacting with on-demand content through smart research. What if we were tallying all of this up in the background and making the documentation easily available for you to input into your CPD home? Well, that's exactly what we're working on. And here to take us through where we're at in that journey is Steve Snow, CEO and Director of Praxhub.
So thank you very much, Louise, and thank you everyone for inviting me down here to talk about CPD and the changes that are happening in the CPD market. Because even though, from my perspective, I live and breathe CPD every day as a CPD provider, when I was chatting to Grant during the lunch break, realised that even for somebody who's out there on the road and at the coalface, that the awareness and knowledge of these changes are not really experienced completely and broadly. So, use this one. So I just wanted to talk about the changes to CPD, but starting with really just at the starting point, what is CPD? So CPD is really the framework. It's the foundational framework of education that we have here in the market. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept of continuing professional development education, and it's essentially what doctors do on a regular basis in order to stay informed and up to date so they can treat their patients as best they can. But also from a public policy perspective, it's generally about risk mitigation and ensuring a degree of confidence that we have in our public healthcare system. And it's because of that, the government mandates that healthcare professionals do a certain amount of CPD each year. We have a strong regulatory framework here in Australia for the delivery of CPD. At the peak body is the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, or APRA, who in turn work with the medical boards, and in this context, the Medical Board of Australia. And the delivery of the CPD framework is then delivered by what is now being known as CPD homes. So RACGP, we've got ACRM, and then the new kid on the block, which is actually called CPD Home, which is a very clever marketing tool of theirs, which sits under the AMA. And they get their authority to be able to deliver their CPD programs and framework through the Australian Medical Council. So, as Louise said at the outset, the big shake-up this year is that all healthcare practitioners, all registered healthcare practitioners, and those who fall under as being medical practitioners, so doctors, are now required to do 50 hours of CPD education each year. And this is a pretty significant move, and I'll explain why. There's a couple of other things that they need to do. They need to create plans, which they've done previously in the past, and then it got dropped, and then it got brought back again. But then the other big one is that they all need to select or nominate a CPD home. Because I've only got 10 minutes, I'm only going to talk about point number one and why this is so significant. So what did the world look like before this year for GPs? Before this year, GPs operated under a points-based system, and they needed to accumulate 130 points or CPD points every 3 years. And they could do that in a number of ways. They could do Category 1 activities, and they were typically 40 points. A typical type of Category 1 activity would be doing a 6-hour workshop or a lecture, typically on a Saturday. Category 2, which was 2 points for every hour, and for that it was usually just things like lectures, so accumulating 2 points every hour, and then there's CPR training, which was mandatory, and that's 10 points. What the table below shows and indicates is what the impact of moving to 50 hours per year and what this actually looks side by side. So if we look at before 2023, a GP could do 2 40-point activities, and that would obviously be 80 points. And then they could do 21-hour activities, there's another 40, and then you do your CPR training, and that's the 10. And then you've got your 130 points. Don't mind my arithmetic error for those who have already picked up on it. On the right, it's not 32, it's actually 38, but apparently the percentage calculation is correct. But what that table on the right is, what the column on the right is showing is that for the equivalent amount of time, a GP is now accumulating 38 hours across their 3 years. So 38, somebody do the math for me, but I'm led to believe that's correct. It's 25% of what they otherwise would have accumulated to have fully satisfied their compliance obligations. The reason why I think it's really important, and why I think it's important for Telstra Health and MedicalDirector, staff to understand about this, is that has had a very, very large impact in the market. We hear about it, we see it every day, and it is a big compliance hurdle now, particularly for GPs. And I think, as I was saying to Grant during the break, I can editorialise as to why I think it's more significant for GPs than other medical practitioners. But what I really think is that CPD is not baked into practice in the same way that other specialties experience. So GPs typically do a lot of their CPD hours outside of clinical hours. I'm not going to go into this too much, but there are 3 categories in which now need to be satisfied in order to be able to accumulate those CPD hours. There's educational activities, there's measuring outcomes, and reviewing performance categories. We know from the feedback that we receive, at least from the RACGP, that there's a lot of educational activity hours out there. There's less so in the other categories, making those harder to get. And there's different types of activities. I'm not going to go into this in too much, but the educational activities people would be largely familiar with, types of workshops and conferences and on-demand type of education. The reason why it's represented there as a Venn diagram is because the activities can be described as being hybrid, and that means that you can have an educational activity which might also be a measuring outcome activity. So, for example, you do a lecture, followed by a mini audit. So who are we? Who's Praxhub? We are a technology platform, first and foremost, and we accumulate and we deliver CPD education into the market, and we do that primarily in the primary care and the general practice space. What makes us different to other providers out there is that we're an aggregator of content. So we work with organisations to create and to also curate content that comes into the platform. So we work with, at this point in time, over 50 different providers who we have education represented in our platform, of which GPs can register and access this content for free. And if it has been accredited with the RACGP or CPD Home, which is most of the content that's on our site, we are required then to lodge those hours then with the RACGP, or pass them on to the provider, who then in turn lodges those hours with the medical college. So it becomes an end-to-end process for GPs to be able to access education and to have their hours and their compliance obligations dealt with within a single platform. So this brings us to the partnership. So we are really excited about this. It probably started in terms of conversations, started maybe on the better part of maybe a year ago. We entered it fairly lightly in terms of just trying to work out how we could support and how we could potentially help medical directors' customers get access to CPD education and really make your lives easier. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to make access to CPD easier, and we're trying to make your compliance obligations easier. And so we started a program a number of months ago in which CPD education was listed in what is now going to be called the Smart Bar on that side widget. And so as a customer, you can go in and you can access that education. The way it works now is to click on the Smart Bar and to click on an education tile, you will need to log in or register with Praxhub as a user. But as Louise said at the outset, we're trying to make this easier, and we're looking to ways to make that even easier as we move forward into the future. So we really want to get to a one-click solution where, as a medical director customer, you would be able to access a range and a raft of CPD content, not just simply video and on-demand content or module-based content. It could be future events. They could be physical, face-to-face events, because what we know in the work that we do is that CPD is different for all GPs. Some prefer it on demand, some prefer a lecture, some prefer a webinar, others prefer to turn up and actually physically attend an event. So we don't ever prescribe that it's one solution fits all, but we want to get to a point where it's going to be really, really easy for medical director customers to be able to come in to the platform, to be able to access CPD education and to have their CPD hours accumulated and recorded in a whole bunch of different ways across the Medical Director platform. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Hi, I just had a question for Praxhub. Praxhub, sorry. Just about, it was interesting to hear that doctors would be able, there would be some information collected from around what they were doing in their normal day-to-day workflows that could be then uploaded for CPD points. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
I think I can talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talk about this, I guess, collectively as CPD leakage. So GPs are regularly engaging with what would probably qualify as being CPD activity or CPD content. And so what we're talking about in terms of the medical director partnership is being able to capture that more holistically. So the kind of education that we have on our platform is more your traditional and typical CPD content. So that might be engaging in a video or a module or something of that nature. What we're talking about more holistically is on the Medical Director platform with customers going in and, say, reading a decision-making tool or reading a paper, is being able to capture that incidental CPD activity, which then accumulates and then aggregates those hours in a way that when it gets to that point of time of saying, have I done my 50 hours per year, I can actually see that in a form of potentially like a visual dashboard or at least in a numerical aggregation of that time. So then that starts to minimise CPD leakage across all of the activity which they're doing in their day-to-day clinical practice.
I think this is a terrific opportunity to do just that. You know, we have a population of GPs who sort of really need that 50 hours and you know, Steve, as you've mentioned to me, the current average balance of GPs across Australia is nowhere near that 50 hours for the 2023 year. So we've got, you know, an audience of people who are dying to have that information, but who are very busy and who need to have that information, you know, served up in a way that is practically easy for them to absorb. And then you have a number of researchers and other organisations who are desperate to educate. So we're hoping to be able to sort of bring those two parties together, and I think through software is a great way of being able to do that.